So funny enough, the other day, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE just came out, and now we get to finally talk about the predecessor of that phone, the one that came out in 2020, the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE, and see if this phone is still worth it. Now I will tell you, I think this phone is still completely worth it in so many different areas, and there are some key areas where the S20 FE may be a better phone to buy than the S21 FE. Now I will tell you, the 21 FE is definitely going to be better. I'm getting it in-house and testing it and everything, and by the time you watch this video, maybe I already have it, but the S20 FE came at a time where the S20 was already in its life cycle for many months, and at that moment, it was cheaper on Amazon to buy an S20 than it was to buy an S20 FE, and it's the same case with the S21 FE, to be honest. Now, if you want to pick up this phone or some other phones I'd recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, the body of this specific phone is a little bit different. So, when you look at this phone on the front, the panel is still very good. 6.5-inch Super AMOLED display, 1080p 120Hz, and when this phone first came out, we compared this panel against the S20s at that time, and this panel really wasn't as good as the S20s, but it really wasn't that bad. And then a couple months later, the Galaxy S21 came out, and we noticed that they switched back to 1080p on that too, so that's kind of made the S20 FE's panel a little bit better, just because it's very similar to the flagship S21. So that's a very interesting thing. You have the hole punch display up top, you have an inbuilt fingerprint sensor in the display, you have a USB Type-C port on this thing, but you also have a microSD card slot. Now both the Galaxy S21 and the Galaxy S21 FE that just came out don't have microSD card slots, so this phone actually has that, which is amazing, and I love having that type of capability. Now on the back, we have another kind of controversial thing. This specific phone had a plastic back on it. Now I was not a fan of that at that moment, but since then it seems like we kind of got used to it because the Galaxy S21 also has a plastic back too, so that kind of threw things off too a little bit. I think the S20 FE is still a very good phone in so many different ways, but I wasn't a fan of that plastic back, but all the other Samsungs since then pretty much have it, so there's nothing we can really do about it at that moment. So when you feel it in the hand and you kind of mess around with it, it still feels very premium. It doesn't feel cheap. You have reverse wireless charging on this thing. You still have that microSD card slot, and you have that 120Hz display. So this is still a pretty good phone when it comes down to like flagship features. Now another advantage of this phone is the camera setup. This thing has that triple camera setup on the back, so 12 megapixel wide, 8 megapixel telephoto, then another 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor, and on the front you have a 32 megapixel wide angle lens. Now luckily for us, we can shoot 4K videos at 60 frames per second on the front and the back of this phone. So that does kind of make me feel a little bit better about this device. This camera maybe isn't as good as the Galaxy S20, but this is still a very solid camera for sure. And if you need a phone where you just need to go ahead and pick it up and be able to use the camera and expect great features, this is still a very solid phone. I still think it has a lot of capability, and one of the best things about Samsung cameras compared to a lot of other UIs out there is that Samsung just throws everything that they have inside of these cameras. I remember with like the Galaxy Note 3 and the S4, those things had crazy camera features on them, and Samsung has, been implementing a lot of features on these phones. So even 5 years from now, you can pick up this camera and be like, oh my god, this phone has this type of feature, this type of feature. You still have things like portrait mode and night mode and so many different things like that. And if you need more features, you can always download some apps on the App Store and then pretty much move on from there. So I love having the ability of shooting 4K at 60 on the front and the back. So I think that's a really cool thing as well. So in terms of the camera, that pretty much covers that up there. But in terms of software, this is where things are a little bit different. I'm not a huge fan of One UI, but One UI has gotten a little bit better throughout time, and One UI 4 does bring a lot of cool implementations as Android 12. I think the Galaxy S20 FE is getting it sooner than later. I don't know if this one is supported as of right now. Maybe it's being released. I know the S20 is being released, slowly, but this phone is still getting this software, so that's a very important thing to keep in mind. At some point in the next couple of months, your Galaxy S20 FE is going to be able to get this next version of software, and that is a really big deal in my opinion. Being able to get this phone and be able to use all the features and abilities within One UI 4 is a really big deal. This phone should also be getting One UI 5 as well. If the Galaxy S10 ended off in One UI 4, looks like the S20 and S20 FE are probably going to end off with One UI 5, which is really good. So in terms of longevity, longevity, you are still going to be getting a supported phone for now, which is a really good thing in my opinion as well. So in terms of that covers it up there. Now moving on to the performance side of things, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 650 GPU, and 6 gigs of RAM on the base model, but it does go up to 8 gigs of RAM. Now the specific model I had was that 6 gig of RAM option, and like I've mentioned before, this is still a very good performing phone. The 120Hz panel really adds a lot more smoothness and fluidity to this whole entire device. Now One UI isn't perfect, and I feel like a lot of the faults that I have with this are more focused around One UI, which is one thing you kind of have to deal with. But when I use this phone and I kind of mess around with it, in terms of the performance segment, this is a very decent performing phone still. It had the best chipset of 2020 in it, so that automatically makes it a little bit of a better performing phone for a lot of you. But also, whenever I compared this phone to any other phone that I had, and I was comparing it to the S20s and the S10s and the Pixels at that time, this is still a very good performing phone. If you're doing light apps, obviously this thing's going to dominate, but even if you're doing heavy intensive gaming or video editing or split screen multitasking, the phone's going to get hot. But other than that, this is still going to be a very good performing phone when it comes down to it. So if you're somebody who wanted to go and get one of the best performing phones of 2020, this may not be the first choice, but it has the best chipset of that time, so you do have to kind of give it a little bit of credit there. So again, if you're pretty much going to go ahead and expect to get the best performing phone of all time from this thing, do keep in mind that it is approaching 2 years old this year, and it may not be the best idea to get this thing because of that, but it's still a very good performing phone. And if I had to use it, obviously it's still good. It's almost the same exact thing as the Galaxy S20, and that phone is still a very good performing phone as well. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up there. Now another big advantage of the Galaxy S20 FE is actually the battery life. This thing has a 4500 mAh battery inside of it, and I think the S21 FE also has pretty much the same battery size in it too. And this is still, you guessed it, a very good battery size and a very good battery life. With the ability of having wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, those are some really cool features and some really big flagship features that are still supported on all the phones since then. So I definitely do think, if you're planning on getting a Samsung phone, and this is a decent phone when it comes down to battery. I still think the S21 Ultras and the Note 20 Ultras still have better battery life, but this is not a bad battery life by any means, and I still am actually a huge fan of it for sure. So in terms of that covers it up there. And to kind of, break it down for you, I think the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE is still completely worth it in 2022. It has a lot of capability. It's not a cheap phone, although, it is at a cheaper price tag now. We do have the successor of this phone, and there are some differences with this one and the S20 FE, but a big thing to keep in mind is that this phone is still supported with software. It still has great performance within it. The camera quality is still pretty good. You have an inbuilt fingerprint sensor, 120Hz display, micro SD card slot. This phone has a lot going for it. It's not perfect, but I definitely do think for a lot of you, this would be a great phone to pick up if you, are in the middle of, upgrading your phone and your phone broke, or if you just need a phone to get you through the next 2 years. This is a solid phone for sure. The only thing that's kind of unfortunate is that it's about halfway through its software life cycle, so it's going to get One UI 4 very soon, and then One UI 5 is probably going to be its last update, which is coming out next year. So if you want to get a phone that you want to keep a little bit longer, you may want to go for an S21 or wait till the S22s come out, but this is still a pretty decent phone, and I would still recommend picking it up this year. So that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.